Welcome to the Darkstream. Voxday, voxday.blogspot.com, and unauthorized.tv. Thanks for tuning in. We are doing a special edition Darkstream tonight, and we are addressing what's going on with the Patreon situation. That's why the title is The Panic at Patreon. Because that's exactly what's happening, because as you may know, they've taken the unusual step of filing a lawsuit against some of their users. And the reason that I'm addressing this publicly, because we've actually kept most of the details out of the public, because you never know what is going to, what's going to come out and so forth. And also, arbitration is generally a game of positioning. And so 80% of all arbitrations end in settlements. So the intrinsically adversarial, one side wins everything doesn't usually apply to arbitration disputes. Which, of course, is one of the many reasons why corporations tend to favor them, especially because they tend to cost less and they tend to be a little bit more predictable than, leaving things up to the whim of a judge somewhere. But now that Patreon, in their flailing around and desperation, has taken this uncharacteristic action, there's no reason for us to remain quiet about some of the stuff that we haven't let people know about. And so what we're going to let you know about is some stuff that is very serious, and is why there is probably a better than 30% chance that there will be no Patreon around this time next year. That whole thing about them being the next billion-dollar company is never going to happen. In fact, once it comes out, once it becomes public knowledge how they operate and the slipshod manner with which they operate, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest if some of their investors decide to pull out. It's that bad. And so anyhow, I want to address first some of the takes on it that you're seeing on the internet, specifically on the Reddit forum, where they've attempted to dox and make life difficult for the 72 bears that are currently the subject of the lawsuit filed by Patreon. Let me see if I can find it here. There we are. Okay, so the short title is Patreon Inc. versus a gentleman by the name of Mike. It's got the list of all 72 of the names, which is not technically a violation of the California Data Privacy Act. Unfortunately, the California Data Privacy Act specifically excludes legal claims from this. However, it's a pretty unethical thing to do, especially in light of the fact that their case is just absolutely ridiculous, if not retarded. So anyhow, let's see. Here's the first one. Vox, Owen, proving their leadership skills, leading their backers into a stupid, detrimental situation they have no hoping of winning, which was also completely unnecessary. Okay, so let me go ahead and correct that one first. We not only have a hoping of winning, we have already won. There was only ever one key core decision that mattered. And that decision has been made. That issue has been settled. It's all over now, except the playing out the grinding out the time. And that's why Patreon is doing what they're doing. That's why they filed the lawsuit, because they know it's over. And if they weren't so retarded, they would have simply accepted the reality of the situation from the beginning, because the whole situation was mathematically certain from the very beginning. But the core problem that they had is that they didn't go with a first-rate law firm like Indiegogo did. Oric has a bunch of people from Stanford, Harvard Law, first-rate, very smart lawyers. For whatever reason, and I'm beginning to suspect that a company like Oric would have told Patreon that they couldn't win, that it was a no-win situation. I don't know that happened, but that's what I would tend to suspect. Now, keep in mind, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not up on the the various case law, written law, etc., etc. But the lawyers that I know are very, very, very good lawyers. We're not talking about a little panty waist boutique pit bulls out of Oakland, which is what they went with. One of my best friends is former head of legal at a $2 billion company. In contrast with that, Patreon's head of legal is a young guy named Colin Sullivan, who got the job when he was 3 years out of the 143rd best law school in the country. So we're not talking about, we're not even talking about third-rate lawyers here. We're talking about people who are, they're not bottom feeders in the sense of, the rumpled tie guy, chasing ambulances. They're probably a step up from that, maybe two. But the key thing is that they simply didn't understand how arbitration works. They truly never understood how the system functioned. And it was really bizarre to see how not only did they clearly not know, but they didn't even learn from their mistakes. And it's gotten quasi-comical at times, because they will essentially attempt to make their case to the people who are, like the secretaries. I mean, it's as if they would show up at the law school, or not the law school, at the court, and start trying to recite their whole case to the clerk of the court. And so, and the clerk of the court is just sitting there going, dude, just give me your check. I'll give you a number, And so, but you have to keep in mind that there's also another element at work here, which is the fact that we're pretty close to, if we haven't already reached the point where the interests of Patreon and the interests of their lawyers have diverged. Their lawyers have already failed, but they keep getting paid whether they're winning or losing. And the smart move, obviously, once you get to the point where the outcome is inevitable, is, swallow hard, wave the white flag, reduce your losses as much as possible. That's what smart companies do. What stupid companies do is they listen to the lawyers beyond that point. Because once you get past that point, all the lawyers care about is making sure that they keep the checks coming. So they lose, they lose on the important stuff. And then instead of telling the client, hey, look, we did our best, we took our best shot, but we lost. It's time to end this. That would be the ethical thing to do. But what the unethical people do, and trust me, these people are wildly unethical. I literally have never ever seen or heard of somebody who lies more frequently or more transparently than one of the lawyers for Patreon. I mean, it's amazing because he will lie about stuff in writing concerning things that he's already written. It's like he doesn't realize that people have memories, or that writing means that things last. It's astonishing. So anyhow, Tyler, if you're listening, I'm talking about you. I'm not even a lawyer, and I can see that you're practically retarded. I mean, it's astonishing. And I mean, here is how dumb this guy is. When one of the lawyers talked to Patreon about a potential settlement, this idiot not only claimed that this was an attempt at extortion. Remember, the Patreon terms of use requires you to talk to them. Requires you to talk to them. So one lawyer talks to them, and the next thing we know, this idiot Tyler is writing letters to people about how multiple lawyers are attempting to commit extortion. Now, what's particularly amusing about this is that one of the lawyers had never had any contact with them whatsoever. No conversation, no writing, no anything. He literally accused a lawyer of committing extortion who had never even had any communication with them. I mean, if this guy doesn't end up getting disbarred at some point in time in his career, I will be surprised, because he has no self-restraint and is just a liar that is so shameless it borders on the pathological. And so anyhow, so to go on, now, so that was the one issue that we're talking about there. Let's look at some more of this keen legal analysis that we're seeing from the Reddit folks. Let's see. They filed false claims. Patreon is suing for arbitration and lawyer fees. No, they didn't file false claims. What they did is they told, here's the exact sequence of events. Patreon deplatforms Owen. Owen talks to them, gets in touch with them, and talks to them as is required by the terms of use. You have to talk to them before you go and file for arbitration, and you're not permitted to file a lawsuit. Period. So then, Owen files his arbitration. His backers don't file the arbitration right away. And this is very important. First, because they had to talk to them, which they did. But they didn't file it right away because California passed a law called SB 707 that requires the company that has written the agreement mandating arbitration to pay the fees for the arbitration within 30 days. It's a new law, just took effect January 1st of this year. And we had a pretty good idea. The legal team had a pretty good idea that Patreon was going to be a typical company trying to drag their feet and not paying the fees on time. And we were correct. But that's why the arbitrations were not filed right away by the backers. So what Patreon did is they engaged in a very deceptive practice of having been informed what the arbitration was going to be concerning. They went and they quickly made a surreptitious little change to their terms of use saying, you must arbitrate unless you are going to bring an arbitration relating to what these people have told us. And to make it even worse, they didn't even notify most of the people, most of the users. And it gets better. And this is the big thing. And this is the one that's going to be fun, Patreon. Colin, Tyler, I hope you're watching this, because we're now letting the whole world know about the fact that you violated the data privacy of nearly 3,000 people. And that's the only one that we know about so far. See, what happened is they have such horrifically bad data practices that they actually sent every single backer's information of another creator to Owen. This is a massive data breach. It is a huge violation of the European Union's general data privacy regulations. It's a huge violation of the UK's rules. And although the California Data Privacy Act did not come into effect until afterwards, here's the best part. They still, to this date, have not notified any of those thousands of people that all their account information was sent to a third party. Naughty, naughty. How much they gave, their emails, their real names, who they were donating to, and how long. Now here's the best part, is that these things have been going on for a while, right? It gets even worse. They've actually put in writing that they don't think that they are liable, that they don't think that they are responsible for the GDPR, despite the fact that they have a headquarters in Dublin, Ireland, which is located in the EU. Now, I live in Europe. I'm not a lawyer, but I do run tech companies and so forth. And I can tell you that the GDPR is freaking terrifying. We literally don't send out 1/10 the emails that we would have sent out prior to the GDPR, just because the rules are so strict and the penalties are so harsh that it's just not worth it. Unless you're absolutely certain that people can, that you've passed all the checkpoints, that you've dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and stuff, it's just not worth it. And I know some of you have actually suffered from this because you don't, if you don't whitelist our stuff, we're not going to email you twice. If your emails happen to bounce, we're not sending one again. We and other European companies are very, very, very cautious about this. Why? Because the fines are so harsh that they amount to, for example, just last week, or maybe it was the week before, it was reported that a grandmother was being fined $50 a day for each day that she didn't take a picture of her grandchildren down from Facebook. $50 a day for one very minor offense. Now, let's say for the sake of argument that the data protection authorities are willing to overlook the fact that there hasn't been any notification of the wrongdoing in months. And if they're willing to overlook the fact that Patreon's lawyers have put in writing that they don't believe that they're liable to it. They don't believe that it applies to them. And let's imagine that European courts and regulators don't love to fine the hell out of every arrogant US tech company that falls into their hands. I mean, it's not like an EU court has fined Google $9 billion, right? Oh, wait, they have. So even if we just ignore all this stuff and we say, well, maybe it's on the level of a grandmother posting a picture of her child. That's going to be a fine that will probably run somewhere around $30 million. So I guess that's where most of that $65 million they got in investment last year is going to go. And here's the amazing thing. They're paying people to do this to themselves. This is one of the dumbest things I've ever seen in the technology world. The whole thing was completely and utterly avoidable. All they had to do is just not try to police a comedian on other sites. They never had anything. They never had anything to do. They never had any complaint about Owen's behavior on their platform. None whatsoever. And yet here they go and just begin this failure cascade. Just because they couldn't stay in their lane and do their job, just because they had to get SJWs involved in trying to police people and trying to tell people what to do, then it just generated this massive cascade failure. And here's the thing, and here's why it's so much worse than it sounds. See, and this is also why the GDPR is so freaking terrifying. You can be fined severely if your processes are considered insufficient. So there have been a number of fines, big fines, even if you haven't had a data breach, even if you haven't violated anyone's data privacy. If they just look at your systems and say, those are not sufficient, something bad could happen, they can fine you a couple $100,000. And there's no appeal. These are not court actions. The European Union is not famous for its restraint in these regards. That's why everybody is so careful over here. And so I looked at the, I mean, obviously, we have to abide by these things ourselves. And so there's a list of 7 checkpoints. There's a checklist of 7 points for US companies to abide by the GDPR. Guess how many of those 7 points Patreon is abiding by? I'll give you one guess. None. They're not abiding by anything. And so Ursa says, Patreon's a major ticket holder, though, so they're well protected by the B system. Well, yeah, they are. There's no question. But that doesn't let you go up against, the beast itself. Even if you are, actually, especially if you are the wicked, you have to obey the beast. And so they're not. And so when you look at this, when you see all of this happening, then you can see why they are so panicked about this. And all that lawsuit that they filed against the bears, no bear is going to pay a single dime to Patreon or Patreon's lawyers. That's not what that lawsuit is about. Some people have theorized that it's about doxing them. I genuinely don't believe so. It's not impossible, but I genuinely don't believe so. What it's really about is trying to find a way to delay the arbitrations that are all beginning. Because when an arbitration, remember, we're talking about people who drag their feet before paying $1,500 a piece for these things. What they're desperately trying to do is that when a arbitration commences, if you're the side that has to pay for it, then you have to pay for the initial $5,000 to $7,000 as a down payment on the arbitrator's time. And so what they're desperately trying to do, and there's more to it than just the lawsuit that's been filed, but what they're desperately trying to do is they're trying to get something that they can wave before all the arbitrators and say, stop, you need to delay this. You need to hold off. Now, the funny thing, of course, is that this is accomplishing precisely nothing. Starting next week, they are going to get dozens of notices, which are warning them, or basically giving them 30 days to stop their deceptive practices, stop their attempts to strip consumers of their rights. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't interpret what the Legion is doing exactly. But what it amounts to is the law relating to deceptive practices says you have to give the company committing the deceptive practice 30 days to fix it. Now, obviously, they're not going to fix it. They actually use that deceptive practice is the basis of their current lawsuit. And so what's going to happen is that the next round of arbitrations is going to hit, and these are not coming from the current lawyers. See, here's the really scary thing about the Legion. The lawyers that were handling this first stage were not the A team and were not even the B team. They were the rookies, the new legionaries. None of the people involved in the first stage of the Patreon game were the people who were involved with the Indiegogo situation. So now, starting in what will be 30, 35 days, all of the vets are going to be coming in. And not only that, but they have the advantage of 6 months of seeing exactly how Patreon's lawyers and how Patreon itself handles these things and reacts. See, here's the thing, and this is something that you probably know about all of this, is that you never do anything without recon. What they thought was the whole war was never anything but the recon mission. And so, the rookies, clean their clock on the initial go. And so that's why I think that, and one thing that we've learned is that they are not smart enough to understand anything. They're not smart enough to understand the GDPR. They're not smart enough to understand that if 100 people can show up, then it's just as easy for 500 people to show up, or 1,000. Or if you make a really bad blunder on the defense, maybe you'll create the possibility for group actions. And so, I'm not going to go into any further detail about what the lawyers are planning, but I can assure you that I haven't even addressed half of it. And so, Buffy Foster says, all they had to do was transfer money from donors to creators and take their cut. Super simple, but they couldn't just do that. Precisely. And so, that's why I am now saying that there is a better than 30% chance that, despite the fact that this should be a simple business that's plenty profitable, there's a very good chance that just because they have handled the situation with such a complete lack of foresight and a complete failure to understand who and what they were dealing with, that it's now at the stage of an existential crisis, because it's not about us. Obviously Owen and the Bears and that sort of thing make things difficult, but when you decide to take on the European Union, when you decide to directly violate California laws that have just been passed and signed into law and become active, there you're dealing with a situation that just goes way beyond a simple legal dispute. There you're dealing with structural flaws in the organization itself that are, indicative of corporate cancer. And so, it's going to be very interesting to see how this plays out over the next few months. I would say the next 2 months, because they're flailing around and they're reacting in a panic to the first wave. And this is a classic example of failing to read or understand Sun Tzu. There's an old saying, if you owe the bank $10,000, the bank owns you. If you owe the bank $20 million, you own the bank. So what they were thinking was that we can push anyone around. We're a big company, not that big, but relative to the individual consumer, sure. We have the ability to hire lawyers. We have our in-house legal counsel. What can one person do? But here's the stupid thing. Their whole business involved bringing thousands of people together in support of one creator. And so when they picked a fight with one creator, they picked a fight with thousands of them. Now that's bad enough. But here's where it gets worse. When you start screwing around with the rules and you start messing around with the terms of use and the contracts, you start engaging in deceptive practices, you start trying to strip the consumer rights from people. Now you've just picked a fight with your entire user base. Every single person, every single user, creator or patron, who had an account with Patreon prior to December 19th, 2019, has a strong, almost undefeatable claim against Patreon. That's 4 million people. That's 186,000 creators. And it's not about, the funny thing is, it's not about the issue that they tried to remove from the arbitration. And so, what I have to say to anybody who's got a Patreon account is, you've got a case against them. You've got a strong case against them. And they are trying to strip your legal rights. They're trying to strip your consumer rights. They're trying to strip your privacy rights away from you. And that's not something that anyone should permit, whether you're on the left, whether you're on the right, regardless of what your beliefs are. This is one thing that every user can come together and agree on, is that we have consumer rights. We have civil rights. And no corporation has the right to take them away. And that, in my opinion, is the ultimate foolishness here, because rather than admitting that what they did was wrong and attempting to rectify it, they double down. They double down again. They double down again and again and again. And that's why the Bears are going to win. That's why Owen is going to win. And that's why this is going to be a landmark in the annals of consumer arbitration. This is the kind of thing that should be eventually a case study in law schools, because it is such a panoply of unnecessary errors. It's such a unmistakable cascade failure that could have been easily avoided. I'm frankly just fascinated to see what's going to happen next. And so, whether this is going to set precedents and that sort of stuff, I don't know. But, I would encourage the gammas on Reddit to just take a step back from your hatred for Owen and your hatred for me. Just put it on pause for a second. And imagine if Reddit, a company whose site you like to use, imagine that they were able to strip away your legal rights, to strip away your consumer rights. If Patreon were to win, which is not going to happen, but let's just say that you were right and Owen and the Bears, let's say your legal analysis was correct. Your uninformed legal analysis was correct and Patreon won. That would mean that Reddit and every other site that you like to use would be able to do the same thing to you. And so even if you dislike Owen, even if you dislike me, you should be cheering us on. In fact, I've talked to people who very much dislike me. And they've contacted me after hearing about this and saying, "Hey, I really hope that the Legion wins this conclusively, because this is important, because this is serious, because it's something that can affect anyone and everyone." On what planet is a corpocracy where a corporation can at any time strip your rights from you, modify its contracts with you, interfere with your business relations? How is that good for you? Yes, it's not good for Big Bear. It wouldn't be good for me if I ever got involved with companies like that. I don't. You'll notice I don't have a Patreon account. It's kind of funny, being tangentially, I'm not really involved, but I'm informed about all of this. And it's very interesting because, technically I have no dog in this hunt. I have no account on, I don't have I don't even have a user account on Patreon. I'm not a creator. I'm not a patron. Just because I never trusted companies like this. I don't have a Kickstarter account either for the same reason. But, a legally uninhibited corpocracy is not in anyone's interest. Not on the right, not on the left. Not if you're a super studly alpha, and not if you're some, overweight gamma stewing in your rage in your parents' basement. It's not good for either of you. It's not good for any of us. And you don't have to believe me. Just keep your eyes open. Pay attention. And, even the worst, think about this. Even the worst people can be used for good causes. Now, I know the gammas are not Christians for the most part, but God uses even the worst people, murderers like David, accessories to murder like Saul. He uses bad and broken tools for great purposes. And so it should be at least possible for you to consider and contemplate the possibility that what Owen and the Bears are doing is actually a good thing that is in your interest, even though you don't like him, even though you're not a big fan of him. And so just consider it. That's all I ask. Just consider that possibility, and, consider the possibility that maybe, some of us are just simply telling you the truth. We're simply telling you what the situation is. I'm not lying about any of this. I'm not even telling you half the stuff that I've heard from the lawyers. But, everything that I'm telling you now is absolutely 100% documented truth. Except for obviously the predictions. That we'll have to wait and see. Hopefully those are 100% accurate too. But thank you, Working Class Bear. As far as the Bears go, there's a reason. Some of you might wonder, well, why did they sue 72 of the Bears when there's like 100 arbitrations? Well, it's not like they told us, but our understanding, or the understanding that the lawyers have reached and shared with me, is that it looks like they are basing their case on the idea that these are people who logged onto Patreon after the change on December 19th. And so what they're clearly trying to do is that they're trying to use a concept called browser wrap to say that you have agreed to the contract because you use the site. The problem that they have there, and this is why their whole lawsuit is not really serious in its own right, is that browser wrap can't be used for that purpose. There's a case called Nyan that established very clearly. In fact, it was a California, I believe a California Circuit Court, one of the higher level courts, that ruled and established a precedent that there is no contract imposed through browser wrap. So their entire case is based on a concept that is not legally valid and is contra the existing California case law. So, this I'll keep you posted as things happen. But honestly, I will be genuinely. I mean, if they don't come to their senses soon, then there's probably not going to be much left but a smoking crater. Metaphorically speaking, of course. But it's going to be interesting to see what the European Union has to say. It's going to be interesting to see what the hundreds of arbitrators have to say, and we'll keep you posted. So, on that note, have a good evening. I'll look forward to seeing you at the next Darkstream. I'm Voxday, and this is the Darkstream.